Tell me if this sounds familiar. You go home and you're telling your kids to do something. Maybe it's to brush their teeth or to take a shower or to simply stop fighting each other, and they won't do anything that you tell them. I recognize that I'm probably not alone as a parent in how this whole thing goes down, but I actually figured out how to get my kids to do what I wanted them to do without yelling at them. And at the same time, create a lot deeper connection, the type of connection that I always wanted as a father, that I felt like I should have in order to be able to guide them. Because when we look at the connection that we make with our kids, especially while they're young, it really plays a big role into how they're going to listen to us as they become teenagers and young adults, versus all the other voices that are out there, from school to YouTube to TikTok, and basically places that we don't want to have them get this. I know normally it would be a woman giving you parenting advice, and by no means am I an expert, but I have gone through about $5,000 worth of therapy and coaching, and I'm going to share with you the number one thing that I've learned from my entire time doing that and all the money that I've invested that is seriously straight ninja when it comes to getting your kids to do what you want them to do without having to yell at them. First thing I learned is that it's totally normal to get angry. I thought maybe I was an asshole parent or an asshole father specifically because I would find myself being really angry over a lot of the things that my kids wouldn't do. Not necessarily the things that they did, but the things they wouldn't do, like eating over their plate or getting up when I asked them to get up and brush their teeth or make their beds, or any of the things that seemed normal and ordinary to me that they just should be able to do. Well, I wound up getting angry about these things primarily because I felt disrespected, and we'll get into that here in a minute. But it's normal to feel angry. The trouble is that when we've got our normal reaction to anger, we actually have the opposite effect that we want. So as a grown-up, your normal reaction to feeling angry is to start yelling. We raise our voices, our temperature gets higher inside of our bodies, and we have to let that energy out, and we wind up yelling. For me, I'd start yelling because I felt so disrespected when I told them to do something and they weren't doing it. They wouldn't even act like they heard me. And so I would simply start yelling because I thought that was the only way to get through to them. For a while, I actually convinced myself that they actually wanted me to be mad at them, and that yelling was the only way that I was going to get them to do anything I wanted them to do. And what happened when I started yelling was actually the opposite ended up happening, was they didn't do what I wanted them to do. I felt worse about myself as a father. They felt worse about themselves as kids. And it was just this perpetual cycle where we couldn't ever get out of it. And if that's where you are, I feel you. Believe me, I feel you, because this was the most frustrating and intense problem I had in my life for about 11 years. But let me get into the one ninja thing. And it's by far the most powerful parenting thing that I've learned in 11 years, especially go through all the therapy and the parent coaching and everything that I've been through. And it's simply to do the opposite of what you might think is the actual response that you should have. So what you need to do is actually ignore all of the behaviors that you don't want your kids to repeat. So if they're not brushing their teeth when you ask them to, or when they're not eating over their plate, or when they're not finding their shoes, or when they're not hitting their brother, whatever they're doing, right? You don't pay attention to that at all. You look the other direction. And this was super interesting for me and hard to work on when my daughter recognized that I stopped giving her attention when she was doing things that I didn't want her to do, and she would get glitter out on the kitchen counter and just pour it out and stare at me. But I had to completely just back off and say, I'm not paying attention to that at all. Because in reality, what I learned is that kids want my attention, and they want your attention. Your children want your attention, and they're willing to do a lot of different things to do it. Now, for me, I was never paying attention when they were doing the things that I said they should be able to do and would normally do as part of being a normal human being. Of course you would brush your teeth every morning. Of course you would brush your hair. Of course you would make your bed. And so I just took those things for granted, like you must do those as being part of this house, and I would never pay attention to those. And so the kids would wind up doing increasingly annoying things, all in an attempt to try to get my attention, and that's what they were really after. So sucking the attention away from the things that I didn't want them to repeat was the first step in getting them to actually do what I wanted them to do in the first place without having to deal with any of the yelling. Instead, what I needed to do, and what you need to do if you want to solve this problem in your own life, is to praise the behaviors that you want them to continue doing. And it's something that never occurred to me before one of the therapists told me that that's what I actually needed to do. They watched an interaction between my daughter and I never praised her once. I never said good job at anything once, because it was all things that I thought that she should just be able to do. But we've already covered that Kids don't necessarily know that. The things that we think that they should do that are actually really good things, we just kind of like take for granted and we don't say anything about it. So I had to start praising her for a lot of different things. And there are two different types of praises. The first is specific praise. I had to go and say, hey, thank you very much for getting up and clearing your plate right when I asked you to do it. That makes me feel really good when I ask you to do something and you acknowledge me and do it right away. That's part one. So you got to have a specific type of praise. But the second praise I learned about was called character praise. Character praise is helping them to understand who they are as a person and make them believe things about themselves that are true based on their actions. So the way that a character praise works is, hey, that was really nice of you to help Paige with her homework. You're a really good friend. Now, you may not think that your child recognizes they're a good friend or not a good friend, but when you reinforce that as a parent, that triggers a little something in their brain that says, you know what? I am a really good friend. And what that does is it starts to perpetuate the cycle of them doing more things to fulfill the story that they now have about themselves of being a good friend. The same thing works with good brother, good sister, very generous person, very athletic person, very smart person. All of these things are character-like praises that help reinforce their perception of themselves in the real world. So that covers like 90% of the problems that I was experiencing with my kids, and I hope it does with yours too. But let's look at one more because this happens a lot. If you've got two kids like me, chances are a lot of times one of them's doing the exact right thing and the other one's doing something crazy that would otherwise get them in trouble. Your natural tendency in that is the exact thing not to do. And I know this because I was doing the same thing. So let's say that both of my kids were sitting down to have dinner and one of them was sitting with their feet in front of them. They were eating over their plate. They were doing everything they should be doing. And the other one had like one foot on the floor. They'd keep on getting up and they'd walk around with like a bowl of mac and cheese and spill some on the floor. My natural tendency was to start addressing the one that was doing something I didn't want them to do. How dare you get up from the table? You shouldn't be doing that. You know you have to sit down, and you start with this pattern of just negative comments trying to fix and correct the behavior. Now, if you ever tried this, you know exactly the result of that. They feel bad, you feel bad, and ultimately it doesn't work. It doesn't help the behavior. It just creates tension in the relationship. What you need to start doing instead, and this works like magic, like instantly like magic. I should be wearing a wizard hat when I tell you about this one. But what you end up doing is you praise the other child who is not doing something crazy for what they're doing well. Oh, thank you so much. I love it when you sit at the table and your feet are in front of you and you're eating over your plate, completely ignoring the child that's acting crazy and doing something that would get them in trouble. And what will happen, I promise you, if you do this, the kid that's acting crazy is instantly going to do exactly what you want them to do. They will like sprint to get their feet in front of them at the table and eat over their plate. This doesn't work like just some of the time. I've been using this for about 4 months now. It works every single time. It's just the point of needing to remember how to do it. So let's review really quick as I wrap up this video. First thing is that your instincts are wrong. Sorry, your instincts are wrong. If somebody is upsetting you, that's a child in your house, your instinct is to get upset with them, start yelling at them because you feel disrespected. They're not doing what you need them to do. They're disrespecting you. You start yelling, but that doesn't give you the thing that you want, which is ultimately compliance. Instead, praise good behaviors and ignore bad ones. There are two different types of praise. There's one that's specific, thank you for doing this particular action. Then there's character praise that builds them up for the type of person that they are. And if you've got two kids, one of them acting crazy and the other one's not, you praise the one that is acting the way that you want them to act, and the other one is going to snap right up. Implement these things into your parenting game right now, and I promise you there's going to be a lot more compliance of what you want to have happen, less yelling, and ultimately more peace in your house.